Hello, I'm Dr. Jigare Panchal, an occupational therapist. So now there is new set of videos about humerus fracture, and in this there are three parts. So this is the first part for that. Thank you. So now before going deep into the topic, first like to discuss about the humerus bone. So if you say that the humerus is the longest and largest bone of the upper limb, you can say it consists of a proximal end and also a shaft and a distal end. So as it's a long bone, so it has all the different demarcated ends as well. So the thing is, all which contain important anatomical landmarks. So the thing is, humerus articulates with the scapula proximally and at the glenohumeral joint. So it participates in the movement of the shoulder. Also, the humerus has a distal articulation with the radius and ulna at the elbow joint. So further, so if you say that the nature of the elbow joint enables the movement that are limited to the arm and the forearm and cannot be performed within the other parts of the body such as supination and pronation. Now, if you say about certain facts about the humerus bone, that in the proximal end, uh, it has a head, anatomical neck, greater tubercle, and lesser tubercle. So, if you want to just remember it, we have mnemonics, the Sally and Ingrid teach maths. So in that way you can remember the certain areas. Also, in that S stands for supraspinatus, I is infraspinatus, T is minor, with which attached to the greater tubercle. So I'll just repeat again for you. In the proximal end, your head, anatomical neck, greater tubercle, lesser tubercle, and the mnemonics, that is Sally and Ingrid teach maths. So in that, S is for supraspinatus, I is for infraspinatus, T is for teres minor, and which are attached to the greater tubercle. So this is how you can remember the importance of the humerus head and the neck with the greater tubercle. Also, we have the shaft. So in the shaft you have borders, that is anterior, lateral, and middle. Anterior, lateral, and middle. So the surfaces are anterior, lateral, anterior, medial, and posterior. Okay, anterior, lateral, and medial. So anterior, medial, anterior, lateral, and posterior. In distal end, you have certain articular parts. You can say for the trochlea, capitum, and non-articular parts are olecranon, uh, radial and coronal fossa, internal, that is medial epicondyle, and lateral epicondyle, also called as external epicondyle. So here, if you say there's a mnemonic is called CITE, CITE. So CITE two freaks. So in that, C stands for capitum, internal, I stands for internal uh, epicondyle, that is called medial epicondyle. T is for trochlea. E is for again lateral epicondyle or external epicondyle, olecranon process, and coronal fossa. So this is how you remember the certain areas and distal and other proximal parts of the humerus. In humerus, you have also there are certain fractures. So impact, because the fractures can be because of an impact, avulsion, transverse fractures, spiral fractures, and intercondylar. So in this you have mnemonics such as arm fracture. So here A stands for axillary, radial, and medial nerve. So axillary is for arm, then in arm you have R, that is for radial, M is for medial fractures, which can even damage, which can become damaged in the humerus fracture. So these nerves basically get damaged in the case of humerus fracture, and because of that you might experience the wrist drop, basically, which is the very common feature seen in the uh, humerus fracture. So now if you see the proximal end, so the proximal end of the humerus consists of head, anatomical neck, and the greater and lesser tubercle, which I just mentioned. So the head is a, you can say, hemispherical shape with a hyaline cartilage covering its smooth articular surface and in the anatomical position. The head faces in the medial, superior, and posterior direction, where it articulates with the glenoid fossa of the scapula. Anatomically, neck, basically the anatomical neck is slightly narrowing below the articular surface of the head. Here the joint capsule of the shoulder is attached. In greater tubercle, you have the most lateral portion of the proximal end of the humerus. So it consists of the three smooth and flat impressions of the posterior superior aspect for the attachment of the muscles, and from superior to inferior, the muscles that attach at these impressions basically are supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor basically. So to remember the muscles attached to the greater tubercle in the humerus, as I gave the mnemonics, that is salient, ingrid, teach maths. So supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor. Also the deltoid, which covers the lateral aspects of the greater tubercle, resulting in normal round shape of the shoulder because of deltoid muscle. So the lateral aspects also contains multiple vascular foramina. So here you have in lesser tubercle, which is located anterior to the anatomical neck and has a smooth, palpable muscular impression. So the lateral aspects forms the medial margin of the intertubercle sulcus. So the suprascapularis muscles attach at this tubercle, and transverse ligament of the shoulder also attaches on the lateral part. In intertubercular sulcus, that is a indentation located between the tubercles. It sometimes referred to as bicipital grooves. The long tendon of the biceps brachii and the branch of the ascending circumflex humeral artery are also located with the sulcus. So sulcus consists of a lateral lip and a medial lip. The tendon of the pectoris is major muscle attaches on the lateral lip, and if you say that the crest of the greater tubercle, while the teres major tendons attached on the medial lip. In the addition, there is a tendon of latissimus dorsi attaches to the posterior aspects. Also, there is an easy way to remember the relation of the latissimus dorsi and pectoris major and teres major muscles as they inserted in the intertubercle sulcus. You can use the mnemonics like lady between two majors. So L is for latissimus dorsi, majors is teres major and pectoris major. So that's how you remember basically. The surgical neck, if you see that there is also a narrowing below the tubercles, are referred as the surgical neck, which is common for the fracture site. So it is in a close proximity of the axillary nerve and posterior circumflex humeral artery. There is a shaft. So the shaft in this, the proximal half of the shaft is of a cylindrical shape, whereas the distal half is a triangular shape. Okay, it goes from cylindrical to triangular shape. So it is also known as three borders, known as the anterior, lateral, and medial borders. Anterior, lateral, and medial. So the shaft also so this surfaces we call it as anterior lateral, anterior medial, and posterior surfaces, as I just mentioned before. Further, you have borders. So you have anterior border, lateral border, and medial border. Anterior border begins at the greater tubercle and runs down almost to the end of the elbow of the bone, and the proximal end of the anterior posterior border continues with the lateral lip of the tubercle circle. Like that, you have lateral and medial borders too. So basically, these are the surfaces, that is anterior lateral surface is the area limited between the anterior and lateral borders. It is as smooth as proximal surface and is largely covered by the deltoid muscle. And the deltoid inserts into the lateral tubercle or tuberosity around the middle of the surface. So the lateral portion of the brachialis muscles originates from the distal part of the surfaces. You also have a distal end basically. So the distal end, if you see, it consists of both an articular and non-articular parts. So the articular parts of the humerus is modified condyle and is wider transversely. Okay, transversely it is wider. So it articulates with both the ulna and radius and consists of a medial uh, trochlea and lateral capitulum basically. So which are separated by a faint groove, and that's how it forms a particular groove and formation of the distal part. So the non-articular part consists of a medial and lateral epicondyle as well as the olecranon fossa, the coronal fossa, and the radial fossa. Three fossas and two condyles. Okay, epicondyles. So basically medial and lateral epicondyle, and three fossas are coronal, olecranon, and radial fossa. So if you say that a trochlea, So the trochlea has a surface shaped like a pulley and covers the anterior, so posterior and inferior surface of the medial condyle of the humerus, and it articulates with the ulna and the trochlea notch. So when the elbow is in the extended position, the posterior and the inferior aspects of the trochlea are in contact with the ulna. However, when the elbow uh, is flexed, the posterior part is no longer in contact as the trochlea notch slides towards the anterior aspects of the humerus. Now we have capitulum. So in capitulum is a convex and rounded projection that covers the anterior and inferior surface of the lateral condyle or the humerus. And unlike the trochlea, it does not cover the posterior surface. It articulates with the head of the radius in extension. Basically, to differentiate between the trochlea and capitulum at the elbow joint is very easy using a certain two mnemonics. So you have a crazy tulips and cutter. So crazy tulips is basically capitula. C is for capitula, which is related to radius, and T is for trochlea, which is related to ulna. So crazy tulips, CRA in that basically which you need to highlight, and TUL which you need to highlight in this. So capitulum is radius, and trochlea is with ulna tulip. And then cutter, you have capitulum is ulna on the upper side, and trochlea is radial. Okay, so that is the two which differences which you can see in this at the particular point. So now you have a medial epicondyle is a blunt projection, which is mentioned. So the muscles which are so the superficial muscles or anterior compartment of the foramen originate from the anterior surface of the medial epicondyle. So the muscles are flexor carpi ulnaris, palmaris longus, flexor carpi radialis, and pronator teres. So maybe sometimes it is difficult to remember if the common flexor tendon is medial or lateral. So the mnemonics here can help you, that is FM radius. FM is flexor medial. So common flexors originate in the medial side. So flexor medial FM, FM flexor muscles, flexor compartment muscles of the forearm originate from the medial side. Okay, so that is for the medial epicondyle basically. Flexor carpi ulnaris, palmaris longus, flexor carpi radialis, and pronator teres. Also in lateral epicondyle, that is the lateral border of the humerus ends at the lateral epicondyle. This is an impression on the lateral and anterior surfaces where the 7 muscles of the superficial group of the posterior compartment of the foramen originate. So in lateral epicondyle, there are 7 muscles, that is brachioradialis, extensor carpi radius longus, same as brevis, extensor digitorum, extensor digiti minimi, extensor carpi ulnaris, and inconius. So the olecranon fossa is a deep hollow area of the posterior surface superior to the trochlea in elbow extension. The tip of the ulnar olecranon process lodges into the fossa. So you have coronary fossa again. So in the coronary fossa is smaller hollow that is also located superior to the trochlea, but anterior surface. So during flexion of the elbow, the coronary process of the ulna lodges into the coronary fossa. And you have so there is again there are quite a lot of anatomical features at the distal end of the humerus. So to remember them is again we need to use some mnemonic, that is site to freaks. So capitulum, internal, that is medial epicondyle, trochlea, external epicondyle, and auricular and coronary fossa. And this is how you divide the particular anatomical structures of the humerus. So particularly if you see that there are certain fracture sites of the humerus which are supposed to be taken care and to understand the variation in it. So if you see that the humerus has a large muscles which are associated with it, and to be understood as if in all the muscles, if you say that you have say flexor carpi ulnaris, palmaris longus, flexor carpi radialis, pronator teres. Then you have brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor digitorum, extensor digiti minimi, extensor carpi ulnaris, incunius. So these are all the muscles which are associated with humerus. And also the other things with mnemonics I just mentioned, that latissimus dorsi is between two majors, that is teres major and teres minor. So it's between two major groups of muscles, which is to be understood, that is teres major and pectoris major, not minor, both are major. So teres major and pectoris major, in between you have the latissimus dorsi. So now we proceed for the other explanation of the fracture of the humerus and certain other anatomical considerations which are very important at this aspect, because if we say that the fracture shaft of the humerus is which is more important at certain point. So here you have so now we'll talk about the fracture of the shaft of the humerus. So there are certain peculiarities of the humeral shaft fracture. So to the next to clavicle, this is the second most common birth fracture basically. It is more common in adults compared to children also. So due to surrounding thickness muscles, thick muscles, there are certain advantages and disadvantages. So there are advantages, as I say. So the incidence of the compound fracture is low. Thick muscles ensure rich periosteal blood supply, and hence fractures invariably unite. So malunion remains concealed within the thick musculature, so no cosmetic abnormality is seen as well, and conceals shortening of humerus, if any. Further, there are certain disadvantages. So that is a wide displacement occurs. Wide displacement can increase the rate of malunion. Soft tissue interposition may occur, causing non-union. Also, due to the ball and socket variety of the fracture of this joint, so the malunion usually does not cause functional disability. Basically, it is more of functional and it is not at all dysfunctional at the point. Gravity plays a very big role in providing a sustained longitudinal traction force to the distal fragment. So this again helps not only in the reduction of the fracture but also in retention of this issue. The thing is shortening also, if you talk about that, it if occurs largely remains unnoticed because unlikely it is lower limb counterpart of the femur, so it does not produce limb or hence there is no functional impairment. So basically it is more of in a functional criteria, it falls in a functional criteria. Also, the radial nerve injury can occur before reduction and sometimes even after close reduction due to it getting trapped in between the two fracture fragments. So, this is the only fracture in the body known to show this peculiarity, because after it is always seen that after the humerus fracture, the person undergoes with a wrist drop. There's complaint of a wrist drop, so they had an injury at the arm. That is because of uh, uh, the sharp fracture uh, parts of a bone actually damages the radial nerve passing uh, near to it. Also, it is important to note that the muscle force create malunion but also help in conceal it. So the gravitational force which provide natural traction forces also may overdo it and causing distraction and non-union. So the muscles reduce the incidence of compound fracture but produce all varieties of displacement in the common simple fractures. Anatomical consideration also I have shown in this figure for you, that is in this figure A and B, that the muscles of the upper arm influence the deformity if the fracture is between pectoris major and deltoid. Okay, so the muscles of the upper arm influence the deformity. If the fracture is between the pectoris major and the deltoid, the proximal fracture fragment is adducted by the pectoris major, teres minor, and latissimus dorsi, while the distal fragment is pulled upwards by the deltoid. So that is the distraction basically which is caused by the different musculatures. Okay. On the A side, you have below the insertion of the deltoid, the muscles which are shown here, pectoris muscles, and above the insertion of the deltoid muscles. So that is the different way it is being pulled. This deltoid it is here shown with the arrow, and that pulls upwards and the other downwards. So if we say basically the upwards is by deltoid. So if the fracture is below the insertion of the deltoid, the proximal fragments is abducted by the deltoid, while the coracobrachialis, biceps and triceps pulls the distal fragment upward. So here if we say that the mechanism of the injury. So there are certain different forces which are acting on it. So if you say the mechanism of the injury, here there is a direct force and an indirect force, birth injuries. So the direct force, so this may produce a transverse or comminuted fracture, while the indirect force is due to the fall on the outstretched hand, and this will produce an oblique or spiral fracture. The ball fracture is again the second most common ball fracture after the clavicle. The clinical features, if we say that there are certain clinical features that shows all the signs and symptoms of the fracture. A careful neurological and vascular assessment is very much important, because I told that neurologically it can cause the damage to the nerves. The peripheral nerve injury basically can occur in this, and also the arterial issues. And because that is the injury to the radial nerve is the most common in these fractures at the spiral groove or the lower one of the humerus.